Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. Or at least so says a line of comedy from a recurring segment of Monty Python's Flying Circus. Leaving aside the propriety of creating comedy out of a historic catastrophe for the Jewish people, the makers of Monty Python were comedians, not historians. In real life, the Inquisition should not have been so unexpected. Two significant historical events emanated from the Alhambra in Granada, Spain in 1492. The Catholic king and queen, as they called themselves, Ferdinand and Isabella, dispatched Columbus to sail the ocean blue. And on March 31st, they issued an edict of expulsion, requiring all Jews to leave Spain by July 31st of that year. While the expulsion order was new, the Inquisition began 14 years earlier. A full century before 1492, Catholics in much of Spain murdered thousands of Jews and destroyed their property in the massacre of 1391. Over the course of centuries, as Catholic monarchs conquered Muslim Spain, Jews were increasingly at risk of life and limb. During the century between the massacre of 1391 and the expulsion of 1492, as many as 500,000 Jews converted to Catholicism to save their skins. To be more precise, they converted to preserve their lives without leaving Spain. Some might have imagined that the persecutions would soon pass. They had been born into what's come to be known as the golden age of Spanish Jewry, had become comfortable in that land, spoke the language, knew the people. Perhaps they identified as Spaniards as much as they did as Jews, which sounds familiar to us as American Jews. Learning about the Inquisition as a young person, I came away with a misconception. The heroes, I thought, were Marranos, a word that means pig, or more often dirty person, according to Merriam-Webster, though I did not know that at the time. Marranos, I learned, never truly intended to convert to Catholicism, and they continued to practice Judaism secretly. The more I've learned, though, the more I realize that the true Jewish heroes of the Inquisition were those who left everything they had known. The Ottoman Empire, Muslim, like Spain in the Golden Age, opened its arms to Jewish exiles who settled in Ottoman lands across the Mediterranean world and in the Middle East, including the land of Israel. Others sought refuge in newly mercantile Holland, which eagerly received an influx of experienced merchants with far-flung connections to other Jews across Europe, the Near East, and North Africa, and soon the Americas. Jewish life flourished everywhere Jews went after fleeing Spain and Portugal, which would soon also take up the fires of the Inquisition. The biggest hole in my earlier education about the expulsion and Inquisition concerned the fate of conversos, as the Jews who converted to Catholicism called themselves. I was under the impression that they were faced with a purely religious persecution. That is, Jews were safe if they converted to Christianity, unlike the Nazis' racial persecution. That misconception was laid to rest when I visited Spain in 2019. Any person with Jewish ancestry remained vulnerable to the Inquisition for decades, sometimes centuries after 1492. Generations after the expulsion, Catholic Spaniards would regularly denounce their Jewish neighbors or competitors in business to the Inquisition. You see, if a Catholic exposed that a person of Jewish extraction was still practicing Judaism, they would be rewarded. After the converso was executed, whether they confessed or were convicted, guilty or not, the Spaniard who accused them would receive their property. If the offending converso was your neighbor, you could expand your house. If it was your business competitor, well, you get the picture. Surviving conversos reemerged as Jews when they immigrated in the 1500s and 1600s. Many went to Great Britain and the Amsterdam. But the first Jews to reach North America, my own first ancestors on these shores included, came from Portugal, where many Jews had escaped from Spain in 1492. The Inquisition came to Portugal too, so conversos left as they saw that they could not live on the Iberian Peninsula in that way. They first went to Recife in Brazil and to Curacao off the coast of Venezuela, and ultimately to New Amsterdam, now New York, after Portugal captured those South American territories from the Netherlands. Now, rather than conversos, and certainly not Marranos, they began to call themselves Anusim, a Hebrew word meaning people who had converted under the thumb of an oppressor. This Shabbat, immediately preceding Purim, is called Shabbat Zachor, the Sabbath of Remembrance. By tradition, we read a passage from Deuteronomy, in addition to the regular weekly reading from Leviticus. It begins, Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek. Remember, Zachor, what Amalek did to you. I dare say that most do not remember Amalek, said to have attacked the Israelites during their desert journeys, striking them from behind when they were famished and weary, killing all the stragglers at the back of the pack. The reason for reading this passage this week is that Haman, Purim's villain, is said to be descended from Amalek. Specifically, Haman is called an Agagite, a descendant of Agag, the king in the ancestral line between Amalek and Haman, whom King Saul fails to kill at God's command. The apparent lesson is that Jews must wipe out our tormentors, or they will multiply. We forget the history of anti-Semitism at our peril. I wonder if there isn't an additional lesson. Amalek murdered the stragglers. They were weak and defenseless, the ones who moved slowly. Nobody, ever, should blame victims for their persecution and murder, and I will not do that tonight. Still, if the history of the expulsion and Inquisition is our guide, knowing when to leave, even in a land that has been golden for Jews, is essential to Jewish survival. Being the Jews at the back of the pack can be deadly. Not long ago, a friend of mine out of state shared with me letters that her family discovered in her grandparents' home after their deaths. My friend's grandparents had left Poland after seeing what Hitler was doing in Germany, but before he invaded Poland. They had gone despite the pleadings of family members who urged them to stay, and before just about anybody was fleeing parts of Europe, not in Hitler's grip. The letters included desperate pleas from my friend's great-grandparents who had not wanted their son and daughter-in-law to leave. Now, their lives were threatened, and they begged their son to find a way for them to come to the United States also, a wish on which he tragically had no way to deliver. I pray that America will never become a place that Jewish people will need to flee. At the same time, make no mistake, persecution and mass murder have come to golden lands for Jews in the past, including both medieval Spain and 20th century Germany. When the Vice President of the United States and the President's closest advisor, the wealthiest man in the world, plead for the inclusion of a neo-Nazi party in Germany's ruling coalition in 2025, we have reason for concern. We also have a magnificent blessing that medieval Spanish Jews did not, any more than my friend's great-grandparents did. The state of Israel pledged to take any Jew from anywhere under the world, under threat or simply seeking to live among our people where we are sovereign. Now more than ever, we have a stake in assuring a free, democratic, and Jewish state of Israel, which is why the World Zionist Congress election is so critical, not only for the welfare of our people in Israel, but also for our own. In a few days' time, we will celebrate Purim, reading a Megillah that tells a story of a plot to murder every Jew in a kingdom that stretched from India to Ethiopia, that is, every Jew in the world at that time. The story ends happily, even as the story did for descendants of the Inquisition's victims who reached American shores. Layehudim haita ora v'simcha v'sason vikar. The Jews enjoyed light and gladness, happiness and honor. May we know that joy on Purim this year and long into the future. Amen.